When the Spanish arrived at Tenochtitlan with the help of Malinche, they came upon what was, at the time, the largest and most populous city on earth. They marveled at the Chinampas and the organization of the city, with its ordered streets and huge marketplace. However, it was the organizational structure itself which also facilitated Spanish takeover. Think back to week 1 when we discussed the structure of small foraging societies. These societies are highly difficult to take over because even though they tend to be less complex technologically, since they don't have specialization and mass production, they do not respond well to forced leadership. You can come into their midst and call yourself their leader, but they will disregard you. If you bring in soldiers, which foraging society leaders don't have, and force them to follow you, they tend to resent it. They usually attempt to vote with their feet and leave, which you then have to expend a lot of energy to prevent them from doing. Even then, foraging groups tend to know the landscape better and often find ways to get away. You're imposing a structure that doesn't make sense to the people you're imposing it on. With societies that are hierarchical in nature, it's relatively easy to place yourself at the top. This is precisely what Cortez aimed to do. After killing the Aztec Emperor Montezuma and most of his family, Hernando Cortez then took his place as emperor. The rest of the Aztec structure could have gone on basically uninterrupted, if not for 2 major developments. The first development was the Spanish distaste for Aztec culture. While they marveled at the size of Tenochtitlan and the organization of the society, they found many Aztec practices strange and barbaric. This might seem obvious since we, too, balk at the idea of hearts being pulled from sacrifice victims. However, keep in mind that back in Spain, the Spanish Inquisition was raging, and both torture and execution were utilized privately and publicly on people accused of heresy against Catholic beliefs. Although some historians believe that the Inquisition's use of torture was overplayed by Protestants after the fact, we know that 3,000 people were executed during the duration of the Inquisition for being non-believers, and devices like the strapado guaranteed a display of public suffering not wholly unlike the methods used by the Aztec. Cortez and his fellow invaders also attacked several small peaceful Mayan villages along the way to the Aztec capital, and took slaves, both for practical uses like translation and for sexual gratification. So the Spanish disgust at Aztec practices didn't stem from any general aversion to human suffering or bloodshed, or any commitment to universal human rights. It was simply a different and foreign torture method used for political and religious ends that differed from those the Spanish utilized, and this is part of why the Spanish disliked it. Their bias against the Aztec culture and religion led them to push their religious beliefs over Aztec ones, and they destroyed Aztec codices, leaving only a few, the most prominent of which are the Codex Mendoza and the Florentine Codex. It's likely that the Aztec people, and even some of their conquered territories, would have been marshaled to fight against the Spanish. However, the second and most important development was the introduction of smallpox and other communicable diseases by the Spanish. Europe had long been overpopulated and had been hit with disease several times, leaving a surviving population with a higher immunity to those diseases. However, these diseases were entirely new to American immune systems. This had happened previously with Christopher Columbus and his crew, but even though disease often ran ahead of the actual colonizing forces, the diseases brought by Columbus had not spread as far as present-day central Mexico, so the population was hit hard. In the Americas in total, from 1492 to the 1800s, as much as 90% population losses occurred. Imagine out of every 10 people you know, 8 or 9 dying within a short period of time in your area. The survivors left behind were often left with no family or community and experienced what we would probably recognize today as post-traumatic stress. Some smallpox survivors whose immune systems did fight off the disease were physically scarred all over their bodies. These dejected and scattered survivors, in low numbers, facilitated colonization by European powers which, lacking in germ theory, usually interpreted this as a blessing from God, meaning that they were meant to have indigenous lands. While this is a somber note to end on, for not just the Aztec but all indigenous Mesoamericans, it's important to remember that this was not the end for them. The Aztec did find ways of strategically using Spanish culture to their own advantage. For example, the Spanish put the Nahua language into a Roman alphabet-based writing system to better teach the Aztec people the Bible. The Aztec people themselves used their literacy in Roman alphabet written Nahua to write court documents arguing for their land rights, or to fight instances of slavery. They also found ways to incorporate the Spanish into their own cosmology and religion, which the Spanish were of course irritated by. The article on Nahua colonial discourse in the supplemental reading section discusses this in depth. Many groups of people today still speak some dialect of Nahua, including contemporary Aztec. And there is a huge Maya population in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. While indigenous Mesoamericans of all cultures experienced slavery and persecution under Spanish colonial rule, their cultures have both endured and changed with the times, just like American culture has.